All right, so tonight we're going to do a ricotta gnocchi and a tomato cream vodka sauce. We'll probably get started with the gnocchi first so we can rest a few minutes, and then we'll get the sauce going, and then it'll all be great. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get water boiling for my gnocchi later. It just takes a little while on mine, so I'm just going to fill up my pot with some water and get that going. My ricotta, my flour, and I'm adding some salt to my water. Give a big healthy pinch or two, and it's on. Cool. So for our gnocchi, I'm going to grab a large bowl out to mix everything in. And I'm also going to grab whisk and a rubber spatula. Make things a little easier. Switch me over.
Did you turn off your funny corners?
Yep. All right, got to get my camera adjusted. All right, so I just have ricotta here. Mine is the exact amount that I need. It's the smaller one, so that's 15 ounces. I got whole milk ricotta. If you got skim milk or part low fat or whatever, that's fine too, but I think the whole milk makes it taste a little better. I was just about to add it in there, but we need to strain it first. So if you got cheesecloth, that's great. If you didn't, you're like me. I'm just gonna use some paper towel to get some of the extra moisture off. So I just have a little bit of a smaller bowl and some paper towel. And I'm just gonna pop that down into there. I'm just gonna kind of squeeze it gently, just try to get some of that extra moisture out. A cheesecloth works really great for this. It's not the end of the world if you're like doing this later and you feel like skipping this point. You can just add a little bit of extra flour later, but it'll make it slightly gummier. So we're just gonna try to get some of the extra moisture off if we can. So I'm just gonna let that sit for a minute and we can get the other ingredients in there. One thing we're gonna need is 3 egg yolks. So I'm gonna have 2 bowls here. One for my whites and one for my yolks, just to make my life a little easier. So I'm just gonna separate these. Hopefully I can do it better than I did last time when it took me like 4 or 5 eggs. 1. Got a little bit of yolk in that one, but not the end of the world. 2. If you have a little egg separator, feel free to use that too. I just think it's a little easier most of the time to do it like that. All right, so I have my 3 egg yolks. I'm just gonna set my yolks to the side because we'll need them in a few, and I'll set my whites to the side. I'm not gonna need them tonight. Get my hand with the quick wrench. Check on my ricotta. There's not a ton of moisture in it, which is pretty good. think my paper towel is absorbing most of it. So I'm just gonna take it out. You just essentially don't want it to be like wet. It's still gonna be kind of cold and damp, which is fine. But you just don't want it to be like dripping liquid. So you can see my paper towels absorbed most of it, so didn't even really need my bowl, but I'll still make a little bit of a difference here in a few minutes when we do this. Right, so to our ricotta, we're gonna add our egg yolks that we just separated. Get those in there. And then we're gonna add our flour and our Parmesan cheese. So we're gonna need about a cup of flour. Grab my cup measure out. So I just have basic all-purpose flour in my container here from Costco. I think it was like an old pretzel container or something, but works great to store flour. So I have a cup of flour. Add that. And salt. Just gonna add a pinch of salt. You grind the pepper. And then for the Parmesan, if you have fresh Parmesan cheese, that's perfectly fine. I have like just a shredded kind. I forgot to grab out. This is what I have. It's just like a bag of Parmesan. That's perfectly fine. If you have like the shaky can, that will work too. You'll want about 3/4 of a cup. I'm not going to grab my measuring cup for that, but I know roughly it'll be that. And I'm just going to whisk that together. And I knew that was going to kind of happen pretty quickly. So I'm just going to change my whisk out when it gets kind of thick to my spatula. You can use your hands for this too if you want. You could do this right onto your countertop if you really wanted to, but it's not that crucial. It's not as finicky as like a regular pasta dough. It doesn't require that much more technique. So I think doing it like this works perfectly fine. You're going to want it to be a somewhat kind of sticky dough. You don't want to overmix this too much. You want it to just kind of come together. The more that you mix it, the more gluten that you form, and then that's when you get kind of a gummier pasta type deal. So just going to get that. So it's all pretty much combined. I'm going to grab some plastic wrap. Just pull some plastic wrap out. We're going to let it kind of come and sit like that in there. I'm just going to take it out of my bowl. There. I'm just going to give it a quick little wrap up to kind of come together. Yeah, so pretty much come together, and I'm just going to let that sit for a few minutes while we get our sauce going, and then we'll come back to this and roll it out and cut it into little pieces. Set that to the side. Is everybody roughly at the same place? Feeling pretty good? Give people another minute or two. Right. Great. So it seems like most people are feeling pretty good. It looks like I saw some thumbs up. So we'll get started on our sauce. So the first thing that we're going to do is I have just like a normal little sauce pot here, not the biggest one I have, not the smallest one either. It's not going to be a ton of sauce, which is okay. So it's just a normal sauce pot. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut my onion. So I have just a kind of a small to medium-ish sweet onion here. Oh, my onion isn't great. So I'm going to take out some of the little bits that aren't really great. Yeah, I need to get some more onions because my onion is not great. All right, so I'm just gonna cut this into, I'm just gonna do a small dice. So we're gonna cut almost all the way through. I should have left a little end on, but I was worried that my onion wasn't gonna be great like it is. So do like that, turn it sideways. Just want a small dice. Since I didn't end up with as much onion because mine wasn't great, I'll add a little onion powder to mine as well. But if you have a full good onion, then no need to do that. Cool. So now that we have that, I'm going to turn my stove on. So I have my pot here just on my guy, so I'm going to turn it on about 5 or 6. Mine goes up to 6, so it's about medium high. And let that come up just for a minute. Then we'll add our olive oil and our onions. If you're using fresh garlic and you want to like chop it, feel free to chop it up right now. But I just have like my my big jar of garlic. Yeah, so this is the garlic, and I have just a big jar from King Soopers. So I'm just adding, so I have like a blend here. It's a canola and olive oil blend. Just adding a little bit to the bottom of my pan. Another seconds to heat up. While that's going, I'm gonna open up my can. So again, I just have San Marzano style tomatoes. If you got regular tomatoes, that's fine too. If you got like crushed or something because you don't have a blender, that's perfectly fine. I just think these taste really great in sauces. So they're whole in here, so you'll see what they look like when they come out. And I'm also gonna open my tomato paste. So just kind of basic tomato paste, nothing fancy. All right. So I'm gonna add my onion to my pan here. A little stir. I like the little off wonder if I, nope, that makes everything blue.
Just like that.
So they're starting to go. I don't want them to get too far before I add my garlic, so I have my garlic here. I'm just gonna add like a big spoonful. You want a couple cloves if you're doing this, like fresh garlic. I really like it, so I'm gonna add about a good tablespoon's worth. Give that a stir. I have in the recipe, if you wanted to add red pepper flakes, you can add those now. If you like it a little spicier, Aaron doesn't like spicy, so I'm not going to add them to mine. But if you do like spicy, then feel free to add a little red pepper flakes, and it'll taste pretty good in there too. And now's the time you can do that. Going to cook those for another minute, and then we're going to add our vodka and our tomatoes. For the vodka, you're going to want about 1/3 of a cup. Yeah, about 1/3 cup. I'm going to grab that measuring cup out. So this is the vodka that I got. It's just from a local distillery about 7 or 8 miles from our house, Spirit Town. They make really good stuff. And it just happened to be the only vodka that I had that wasn't flavored. So that's what I'm using. And I really like them. 6.5 miles is what Aaron said. All right, so those are looking pretty good. Gonna add my tomatoes. This one has a little bit of basil in it, just the can that I got. If you don't have one that has basil, or if you're wondering what that was, it's just a piece of basil. So you can see this came whole. They're just kind of big chunks, but we're gonna blend that out later. If you didn't have a blender or a food processor or something, then I advise to get like a crushed or a puree, so you wouldn't have those chunks, but mine does, and it's gonna be good. So now I'm gonna add my vodka, again, about 1/3 of a cup. We're gonna wanna make sure we cook that out too. We don't wanna have it tasting greasy, but we wanna make sure that gets cooked out. So give that a good stir. I'm gonna turn my heat to about medium right now.
So Kevin, you've only put in the tomatoes, not the paste, right?
So far, yes. We're gonna cook this down for about 5 minutes, and then we're gonna add like the balsamic or tomato paste, as well as like other seasonings. So we're just gonna kind of let this come roughly about 5 minutes or so. If you have a splatter guard or something like that, feel free to use it. I'm just gonna put a lid on it so I don't get splashes all over the place. Just put my lid on it, just so I don't have a huge mess. Not a good full stir. Doing a little bit of tidying up while that comes together. Taking my cans and stuff to the recycling. Any questions or anything like that for the next couple minutes while we have a little bit of downtime? Let me switch back over.
So Kevin, as you know, my tomatoes were not in my order, so we're just using Prego, and we're gonna try just spicing it up by adding the vodka. And then is there gonna be cream in it as well?
Yeah, I'm gonna add some half and half. Yeah, I think that'll probably work pretty well.
It can't get any worse when you add vodka, Marmy. That can only improve it.
Probably right.
So I'm gonna drop my heat just a little bit. I want it to kind of simmer, but not boil too much. If you have,
Should I turn it down?
Yeah, turn it down.
if you have, I have just like an immersion blender that I'm gonna use. If you have like a stand blender, you can use that too. In a little while, we don't need it quite yet, but what you're gonna do for that, I'll show you. I just have like the thing here because you're gonna put everything in here. Take this little piece out. because you don't need this in there. So you're gonna put this on there and get a towel or some paper towels. And you're gonna put that over here when you turn it on, because if the plastic part is on there, it's gonna create this kind of vacuum effect and essentially kind of push it all off because it's gonna be so hot, and then you have hot sauce all over you and it's no good. So put it in here. Don't do it too high because again, you don't want it to splatter up too much, and just put a towel over it so it lets that steam out and doesn't create this like vacuum seal. So you will do that a little later, but if you have an immersion blender like this, like a little stick blender, you'll just kind of stick it right in there and pulse it. But if you're going to use like a blender or a food processor, you'll do the same thing. So with it, just take this little piece out so you don't have this kind of full kind of suction on there. It will get really hot and you will most likely burn yourself if you're not careful. So just wanted to let people know that before we get too far.
Whoa, my sauce.
All right. So I'm going to go back over here. You can see my sauce is just kind of simmering a little bit, which is what we want. You don't want it boiling too much. I'm just going to give it a quick good stir, so I'm making sure nothing is sticking to the bottom. It's been about 4 minutes or so now, so we'll give it another minute. I'm just turning my water down a little bit because it is boiling, so don't want to just waste energy. So I'm just going to turn it down to low right now. You get your tomato paste ready. So again, you'll want about, I think about a tablespoon or so. It's kind of hard to tell with the tomato paste. Again, I'm not going to like grab a tablespoon measure out. I'm just going to grab like a big spoonful. I'm usually not super accurate unless I'm baking. So just have that. I'm just going to grab a fairly big spoonful, about a tablespoon or so. I'm going to grab my balsamic vinegar. You'll want about the same, about a tablespoon's worth. So again, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here. Tablespoon. I really like balsamic. And we're also going to add our salt and pepper. So good healthy pinch. Salt really is important when you're cooking potato stuff. It really needs that salt. And black pepper. Again, I just use like a fresh ground one from Costco. If you've got like a ground one, that's perfectly fine too. Just one about a teaspoon or so, but I'm just giving that a good few crunches together. Give that a good
Ken,
stir.
are you adding any sugar to this?
I am not.
Okay.
The cream will kind of add a little bit of sweetness to it. So we don't want it to be like a marinara. So that's why I'm not adding any sugar to it. All right. All right, so I'm just gonna put this on low and put my lid back on and let it do its thing while we work on the gnocchi. And then right before the end, we're gonna blend it. We're gonna add our cream and our Parmesan, but we don't wanna do that too early. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna kind of go back and forth. So we're gonna switch to our gnocchi now.
Hey, Kev, did I miss the basil somewhere?
No, we're gonna add that at the end.
Okay.
The basil is mostly gonna be a garnish. So you're not gonna need too much of it right now. So again, I just have my all-purpose flour. I just have it clean. My countertop is pretty clean. We're gonna kind of roll it out on our counter. If you don't have a big clean spot, grab a cutting board or something. We're gonna be making some long little strands and kind of make this work for whatever works for you. So just sprinkling some flour on my counter. Grabbing
Kev,
my, yeah. What was that?
Did we add the half and half yet?
Nope, we're gonna add that right before we serve it. It's gonna be kind of twisty. Looking for, yeah. So I just have a bench scraper here. You can use a knife. You don't want to use anything too sharp because you don't want to like hurt your countertop. So a bench scraper is pretty great for that. So I have my gnocchi here. I'm just going to pop that out. I'm going to cut it into half at first. I'm just going to move that over here. We're going to work with pretty much a quarter at a time just to make it a little easier. So have a quarter of it, set that aside. Going to get a little more flour and just kind of dust it on the top. And then we're just going to kind of roll this out into a nice long strand. Similar to kind of like the traditional gnocchi with potato, you're going to use this, it's going to be kind of the exact same methodology. But if you want to be fancy, I can show you how to like do it with a fork and you get these nice little ridges, but it's really not that crucial for this one. For the potato one, it gets a little starchier, so you're going to want to kind of create these grooves, but these make nice little pillows. So I just have a little piece here. Then I'm just cutting about 1 inch little kind of pillows. You want them to be as even as you can, just because they'll cook evenly, but it's not the end of the world if they're not like absolutely, you don't have to get a ruler out. So I'm just going to push those to the side here. So this is about like a ½ inch or so in diameter. You don't want them to be tiny and you don't want them to be these massive pieces because then they won't cook all the way. So it's about a ½ inch diameter.
Can you also show us the fancy fork method?
Yeah. I know places like Sur La Table sell these little boards that are just like a ridged board and you can push on it. Once you have a piece like this, if you just take a fork and you kind of, I haven't done this in a little while, you can kind of just press your fork in and then roll it.
You're off screen.
Well, I'm off screen there. I guess I could have put some more flour on that to start. Just get some flour, put it on there so it doesn't stick. If you kind of push it through and then roll it, it kind of creates this little divot. So.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Kev, if we don't want to make all this tonight, will the dough stay?
Yep. Yeah, it'll be good for a couple days. So you can do it like that.
It's just me right now, so.
Yeah. What I've done before is I'll kind of get my kind of portions like this and then put it on a sheet pan and put it in the freezer so they're frozen individually. And then you can just put them in a bag. If you kind of just stick them in a bag right away, you get this mush, and that's not what you want. You want these nice little individual pieces. So.
But they cook up really nicely.
Yeah.
He's done that in the past when he travels and I'm home alone, and I just grab it out of the freezer and put it in boiling water and it cooks up really nice.
Oh, you're doing it backwards. There you go.
Okay, so I can just leave the dough and then roll it out tomorrow?
Yeah, you can do that if you want.
I don't want to make any more right now.
Yeah. This is a good one for kids too because it's kind of like Play-Doh. Get your kids to help. So again, I'm just kind of cutting these into little pieces.
I thought gnocchi was stuffed with cheese.
Well, you don't know how to say that, so I don't know how
Gnocchi?
Yeah. Roll it out.
Just gonna.
I'll make sure it's still on screen for you
Here.
guys to see it.
I don't want to cook any more than that right now.
I got a little thin, so I'm just pushing it together. It's a really forgiving dough. It's not like if you mess it up, you can't redo it. It's really, really flexible. It's not a very temperamental dough. A So like that got a little weird, so I'm just gonna reform it into a little ball. Again, you don't want to do this as like, you don't want to keep like folding it and everything. You're going to develop your gluten too much, and then you'll get really gummy. But again, if it messes up, it's not the end of the world. And handle it with care. Right. So I'm just going to do all of mine because I don't want to have to get my countertops all messed up and dirty again. But I'm not going to cook all of it because it's definitely, I don't need all of it.
Okay, so that's all I'm doing tonight.
Gonna cut that in half, and then just work with it a little bit. Cut that in half again, so I have more room and you can see it. Right, and have my last little bit here. For the little pieces that I put to the side, I'm just sprinkling some flour on them so that they don't stick together too much. We want them to be all individuals. We don't want it to kind of clump back up again. When I'm making a large batch, when I know I'm going to need a bunch of them, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just pop some in the freezer preemptively, just to make sure that nothing is sticking together while I like work on other things. So this is something you can definitely do earlier in the day if you're like hosting people, and then just pop them out of the freezer or the refrigerator, and it will work perfectly fine to cook them off later. So I have all of my little bits here. Try to be careful and not misshape them too much, but they started to stick a little bit. So if you get a piece that kind of misshapens or something, just kind of roll it back into a little ball. You just want these to be like nice little pillows. Again, it's not as crucial to shape these, I don't think, as like a normal gnocchi. It won't grab the sauce as well, I'll tell you that, but I think that it will still be absolutely delicious. Just kind of separating them. I'm gonna grab
The shape reminds me of those little buttermints.
Yeah, I thought about that, yeah. Right. So I just have a little sheet pan here that I'm gonna toss them on. And I'm going to try to keep them as separated as I can, just because I don't want them to glue together. So you can see here, I'm just popping them on a sheet pan. Just make my life easier when I want to go put them in the water later too. I think that'll be plenty for Aaron and I tonight. Just gonna grab a smaller sheet pan so I can put them in the freezer. So I'm just gonna move these off to the side. Here. Then I'm just gonna put these in the freezer for later. So I just leave them like this overnight, and then tomorrow I'll come and I'll take them and put them in like a quart or a gallon size Ziploc bag. But you want to kind of freeze them individually first. This is also a good technique if you have fruit or something like that, because if you put them all in a bag and then you freeze it, then you get this kind of solid mass of fruit or something like that. And for these, they'll kind of mush together, and then you have to thaw it all, and you can maybe re-bake them later, but it might be really tough. Running out of room to comfortably get them. Yeah. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna pop that in the freezer in a little while. Since they're a little kind of flour and cheesy, I'm just gonna give them a quick wash too. Right. And from the name, a bench scraper is literally you scrape your bench with it, and that gets up a lot of the flour and stuff too. So. That cleared up. And we'll move back to our sauce. All right. So just gonna check on that. Give it a good stir. Mine's smelling really, really good right now. Hopefully yours is as well. All right. Now I'm gonna blend it. So again, if you have a stick or an immersion blender like this, that's what I would recommend. If you don't, be really careful when you're pouring it into your blender. That way you don't burn yourself. Need to make room for my plug for that.
Should ours be bubbling before we put it in?
Are you pouring yours in?
Yes.
Yeah, just kind of pour it up, take it off. Like you don't want to like burn yourself, but it's going to be bubbling a little bit. So again, make sure you don't keep that middle plastic part of your mixer or your blender on there, so you don't create this big vacuum. And it's okay to work in small batches too. You don't want to fill it up all the way, and then you have hot sauce all over yourself. So I'm just gonna put this in there and blend. I'm just trying to get a lot of the big chunks done. It's okay if it's a little chunky still. It's not going to be like this silky smooth mixture. That's perfectly fine. A little texture is pretty good because the ricotta is going to be really soft and fluffy. So I think that's pretty good, but I'll give those that are actually blending it with their blender a few minutes to do that. try and like spit a little bit. And I'm gonna give that a quick taste as well, just to see how that's coming along. If I think it needs any more salt or anything like that. Mine's tasting really good. Really like it. So again, my heat's on low. I don't want it to start boiling now. Quick stir. Now we're gonna kind of add our last couple ingredients here. So I have half and half. If you don't have half and half and you have heavy cream, that's perfectly fine. You can use just a little bit less. If you just have milk, that's perfectly fine too. But just make sure you're not watering it down too much. Essentially, we're going to want about a half to 3/4 of a cup. I'll grab my measuring cup just to make sure I'm not eyeballing it too much. So about half here. Start with a half, and if you feel like you need a little more, feel free to add more, but I usually will start with a little bit, and then I can always add more. Can't really take it out once I've added it. Stir. It shouldn't be this bright orange. It should be like a darker orange. You don't want to add so much half and half or cream or anything where you get this kind of neon orange. I think that's really tasty sometimes, but for this, we don't want it to be that orange. It should be like almost a dark orange or red. Yeah, like a tomato bisque almost. I think mine needs just a tiny bit more. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more. Good stir. And then lastly, I'm going to add Parmesan. You're going to want about a couple tablespoons, or about a quarter-ish, a little less than a quarter cup. Handful. It's not going to be this super cheesy sauce, and that's okay. We can add some cheese later, but we don't want it to be like a super cheesy sauce. The Parmesan will add a little bit of saltiness to it, and a little creaminess as well.
Kevin, I have a general question. Since gnocchi is normally potatoes.
Yep.
What part of the recipe would it have been the flour that was substituted for potato starch, or?
Oh, the ricotta. Yeah, so with gnocchi, you'll still add a little flour in there, but the ricotta you won't really have, so that's kind of where you'll have the substitute. I don't know, I haven't done this specific recipe with like a potato gnocchi. It may end up being a little different. I just haven't tried it with this kind before, or this recipe before.
So you would just like use like a mashed potato maybe?
Yeah, you want to make sure it's pretty dry still though. You don't want it to be like this really wet mixture, because then you get really gummy when you start adding all the flour and stuff. All right, so I'm just turning the heat back up on my water so it's coming to a boil. You're gonna want some kind of strainer type thing to take them out. Excuse me. So this is kind of like a spider strainer almost. Not quite, but I'm just gonna grab that. They'll only take about 30 seconds to a minute, so you don't walk away once you put them in there. Another water's almost there. Just tidying up a little bit while I'm waiting on that to come up to temp. Sure. I'm just going to turn the heat off on that because this is going to be ready in just a couple minutes. All right. My water is pretty much boiling. I'm going to grab the tray that I have. I'm just going to kind of add these individually. Don't grab a big handful because you'll mush it all together. They'll kind of sink down to the bottom, which is what you want. And then once they start floating to the top, they will, they'll be fully cooked. Since it's a fresh pasta, it doesn't take very long. So if you do like a fresh spaghetti or fettuccine or something, it'll take a fraction of the time as it would if you got it dry. And when they're frozen, the same technique will be applied. You want to put them in there, and then when they're floating, they will be done. So they'll take a little bit longer since they're frozen, but they won't float until they're done. All of them are in there. I don't want to agitate this too much because you might kind of smush one or something. So just going to kind of let it go for a few. Again, it should only take about 30 seconds or a minute to fully cook. You start seeing some of mine are floating now. You can't really see too much because the light is in the way. It's just, you can kind of see if I bring it up a little closer. Some of them are starting to float, which is what we want. As they're floating, you're going to want to take them off, which is why I didn't say like, oh, just pour the whole thing into a colander, because we don't want these to overcook. So I'm just going to grab my little strainer here, just kind of get as much water as I can off there, and then put them right into my bowl. That's my serving bowl. Just going back and forth between the two plates to make sure I get an even amount. That's all of them. Yep, that's all my gnocchi here. So I'll switch it back over to this side. So I have my gnocchi here, just in two little plates. I have these kind of plate bowls that I've shown off. Just gonna grab the ladle and my sauce.
Kev, did we ever add the basil or am I?
It's gonna be added to the top.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Oh, there was something.
I'm just gonna add sauce on top here. I have a little bit of Parmesan left because I really like Parmesan, so I'm just gonna add some Parmesan cheese on top. Now my basil. My basil wasn't the biggest that I had in my garden, so I have these tiny little leaves, so I'm not even gonna chop them because I think they'll look kind of nice. on top. And that is everything. How are people feeling? I'm going to turn my spotlight off so people can show off theirs. Where are people at?
I don't know how to do this. Shush. Leave your mama alone. I don't know how to do this. Jason's not here, so there it is. I don't know where my camera is. He's alone.
You're close.
Get close. I don't know. Anyway, I'll take a picture and send it to you.
Okay, sounds good. Turn my camera back there.
Marmy and Pod, do you want to show everyone your special kind of vodka that you added to your sauce? And explain why you have a Lysol on your vodka.
Okay, I had it on mute. You explain. It's in reference to Trump's drinking our disinfect. And that'll protect us against the virus.
They had a happy hour that they hosted on Zoom with their friends, and they used Lysol vodka for all of their drinks.
Joyce, where are you?
I'm over here. I don't know how to take pictures on my, I don't know how to do this stuff.
All I see is your ceiling. What the heck?